We good? All right. I had never been on a blind date before, so I was like, I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure how to handle this. And someone had set me up on this blind date, and so I'm like, okay, we're going to go on this date, figure out what it's like. I show up to go on this date, and the people that had set me up, the friends that I kind of knew, but I hadn't hung out with them a ton, they said, this is our really good friend, and so you'll get along with her. I'm like, okay, awesome. So I sat down on this blind date, and I started acting exactly like all of her friends. I'm like, you know what, if she hangs out with these friends, that's who she's looking for. And so I was acting like them, I was talking like them, I pretended like I was interested in the things that they were interested in, because I'm like, man, I want this girl to like me, and if those are her friends, that's what she's going to like. And so I remember we went through the date, and at the end of the date, she's like, okay, I'll call you later, right? And she didn't call me. So a week later, her friends came, and I'm like, hey, how come, what did she say about me? And they're like, she said you weren't like what she was expecting. And I'm like, that's really weird. Why would she say that? And they're like, I don't know. What did you tell her? I'm like, I just acted like you guys. And I talked to the girl later, and she was like, here's the thing. They're my friends, but I would never date any of them. I was looking for somebody totally different than them. See, I went into this trying to act like them because I thought, man, this is the way I'm supposed to act. And she was like, no, actually, I don't want someone that acts like that at all. I wanted someone that acts different. See, we live in a world where we look around and we see things all around us. We see the way that other people act. But what we need to know is that we need to know that we can be different, and in fact, sometimes the thing that's healthiest for us is not what we see everyone else doing. A lot of times the thing that's most healthy for us is not just what everyone else around us is doing. We're in a series right now, and our series that we've been talking about for the last couple weeks is called Now What? Now what? And here's why. Because a lot of you have grown up in the church, maybe you become Christians a long time ago, and now you're at a spot where you're like, okay, now what? Right? I've been coasting for a long time. Maybe you went to Collide and you made a decision for Jesus, or maybe you got baptized and you're like, yay, I'm on fire, but now what? Now what do I do? What is the next step? And so Paul wrote this text in Romans chapter 12 that explains what we need to do next. In fact, it starts with the word therefore, and it's saying hey, listen, this is what happened. You made a commitment. You follow Jesus. Therefore, do this. Here's what it says. We're going to put up Romans 12, 1 and 2. You go ahead and put that on the screen. It says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. We talked about that last week. This is your true and proper worship. Then it says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. All right, do not conform. That's what we're going to be looking at this week. That's our piece of the verse. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. So let me explain that to you and what that means for you. Let me make that more easy to understand, a little bit more speaking your language. This is what it means. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, a.k.a. don't act and think like those around you. Don't act and think like those around you. Right? And this is hard. I get it, guys. This is super hard because what we see on TV every single day, what we hear in music every single day, what we see at school all around us, the standard of the way that the world lives and acts, that's what we're used to. That's what's normal for us. We see it and we hear it every single day. All right, but that's not our standard. That's not our standard. Anyone enjoying the good weather the last couple days? Right, last couple days, the sun actually came out. It was warm. It wasn't raining. It was amazing, right? And so yesterday we decided we were going to take our kids to the park. We take our kids to the park. So we have a lot of really nice parks around our house. And so we got the kids ready, and they rode their bikes, and we went to the park. And we went to this park that has this really tall slide. It has this really tall slide, really tall, twisty slide. It's 3 stories high. And so we're at this park, and the kids are playing. They're having a good time. And then I start noticing other kids that are playing at this park. I started noticing other kids, and the other kids, they went to this big slide, and instead of going down the slide on the inside, they started crawling down the outside of the slide, right? They're little monkeys, and I'm looking at it, and some of you were like, dude, that's what I would do, right? But these little kids were doing this, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, dude, these kids, they're going to die. They're going to die, right? And then I saw my kids, my little 5-year-olds, they're almost 6, they go, and they start climbing over the rail to do that. I'm like, no! Right? I have to stop them. I'm like, we don't do that. They're like, okay, right? And then a few minutes later, I saw some other kids, those bridge things that are they bounce and flop, right? Those fun bridge things. Like these kids, you can walk on that, or you can go on the outside and like scale the side, right? This is what these kids were doing. And so my kids look at them and I'm like, don't do it. And they go to do it. And all these kids kept doing the wrong thing, and my kids wanted to follow them. So finally I'm like, okay, kids, come on, bring it in, team huddle, right? My kids, my children, we have like a full team, there's so many kids. So I bring them all in and I'm like, hey, listen, what is your deal? Why are you trying to do all this stuff that you know you're not supposed to do? And they're like, but everyone else is doing it. See, in our lives, we look around and we see all these other people doing things, and we go, man, everyone else is doing these things. Everyone else is doing these things. And here's what I had to tell my kids when I brought them in. I said, listen, I know that everyone else is doing them, but our standard, if you're one of my kids, our standard, your standard, if you're a part of my family, is different than them. They can go ahead and do what they want. They have to answer to somebody else. But if you're a part of my family, if you're one of my kids, our standard is we don't do that. We don't act like that. See, if you're a part of God's family, if you've accepted Jesus, your standard is different than the world. But here's why this is hard. Don't think and don't act like the world. That's what Paul says. But here's why it's hard. Because we don't want to be seen as different. Our standard is different. God has said, no, I don't want you to act a certain way. And that's awesome. But listen, it's hard when people look at us and we go, man, I don't want to be seen as different. I don't want to be seen as strange. I don't want to be seen as weird. I don't want to be seen that way. Right? But what we need to understand is we don't belong to the world. And we want belonging from the world, but we already have belonging. We already have acceptance. We don't belong to the world. When I was a kid, my friend was selling his bike. He got a new bike, and he was selling his bike, and his bike was awesome, so I bought it. So my friend Jason, he sold me his bike, and I love this bike. This bike was super cool. The problem was that every time I hung out with Jason, and I had my bike, he wanted to tell me what I should do with my bike. He's like, he would refer to it as his bike, and he would go, hey, you should put this sticker on it. Hey, you should do this to it. You should grease the chain like this. And he would tell me everything I should do to the bike. And I finally had to stop, and I'm like, Jason, dude, here's the thing. You don't own the bike anymore. I do. You don't have a say in what I do with my bike. It's mine. See, a lot of you guys, you're living for acceptance from the world, but you don't belong to the world. The world doesn't get to tell you what is acceptable or what's not acceptable. The person that owns you or paid for you or purchased you has already showed you that you're accepted. That is where your acceptance comes from. It comes from that. And here's the thing. Just like I bought the bike, you have been bought with a price. You've been bought with a price. God paid for you. And it wasn't money. It was something more valuable than money. He gave his son to pay for you. Jesus died on a cross, was nailed to a cross, was buried, and died because he loves you. And the reason that he did that was to purchase you. And if you've never put your faith and trust in Jesus, this is as simple as saying, God, I trust you, and I accept your sacrifice for me. That's it. And when you do that, you become a part of his family. You become something that God owns, and you are 100% accepted by God. It says in 1 Corinthians 7:23. 1 Corinthians 7:23 in the Bible, it says, you were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of human beings. Don't be a slave to the world, to the people around you, the people that say, hey, you should look this way, you should act this way, you should do this, you should do that. Don't conform to those patterns because you've already been bought. You're owned by something else. You're owned by something else, and we need to understand that our identity is in Christ. And we don't need to keep looking for acceptance in all these other things because you've already been accepted. You don't need acceptance by your classmates. You don't need acceptance by the world. You don't need acceptance by the people that are going to say you're cool or you're not. God already says, you're everything I want. You've been accepted by Christ. So Paul writes that. He says, hey, don't conform to the pattern of this world. But, here's the next part of the verse that we're going over. He says, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed, be changed by the renewing of your mind. All right, let me make this simple for you too. AKA, change what you do by changing the way you think. Think like Jesus. Okay? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind means this. It means change the way you act by changing the way that you think. Change what you do by changing the way you think. Instead, think like Jesus. Transform your mind. Transform means to change something. I was in high school and we had a substitute teacher that day. We had a sub, and our sub showed up, and she comes in the room, and she's sitting there, and we're all in the class, and then the sub says, hey, I have to go outside and get something real quick. And so the teacher leaves the room, and so right away I'm like, I got an idea. All right, so I stand up and I tell everyone, I was like, hey guys, listen, I want everybody to take their seat and to turn it around the other way. And so we all, in the middle of class, we took our seat and we were all facing this way, and we turned our seat around and sat down facing the other way. And I said, hey, come here, you two, and I got two other guys, and we went and took the teacher's desk from the front of the class, and we picked it up and moved it all the way to the other side of the class. Right, so the teacher walks in, she had left, and she comes back in the room, and when she comes back in, all the chairs are facing the opposite direction, the teacher's desk is in the opposite direction, and she opened the door and she's like, what the heck is going on? Right, and when she looked around, instead of going, you guys messed this up, you could see in her head that she's like questioning, wait a second, was this how it was or not? Like, am I going crazy? And she didn't say a word. She just walked all the way around to the other side and did the whole class the opposite way, right? We transformed the room. We completely changed the room from one way to the other. Okay, transforming means to change something completely from one way to the other. And Paul says, hey, transform the way that you think. And the word transform, if you didn't know, the Bible wasn't written in English. The Bible was written in Hebrew and Greek. And in the New Testament, it was in Greek. And the Greek word used here for the word transform is metamorpho. Does anyone know what metamorpho might translate into English? Metamorphosis, right? That's where we get our word metamorphosis from. To completely change, to have us go from one way of thinking to another way of thinking. That's what it means to change our mind. So how do we not act and think like the world? Right? If it's what's all around us, if it's our friends, if it's everything else around us, how do we not do that? What we have to do is we have to renew our mind. Paul tells us, make it new. That's what renewing is making it new. Because some of you in here, you think like you did before you were a Christian, you act like you did before you were a Christian, you talk like you did before you were a Christian, because that's what's in your brain. That's what is in your brain. And instead, we need to change the way that we think to thinking like Christ. He was loving. He was others-focused, not himself-focused. He had mercy. He was caring. All of those things that Jesus was is how we need to train our brain to act. Right? So in order to make that happen, we need to do a couple things. This is what you can take home and you can go, okay, here's what I need to do. In light of what Paul told us in this verse, this is great, here's what I need to do. First is this: fill your mind with the right stuff. Fill your mind with the right stuff. Now, you might have heard this before. What goes in is what comes out, right? What goes in is what comes out. A couple years ago, this movie came out, and it was called Coco. Anyone seen Coco? It's a really good movie, right? My kids love this movie, and so my kids would watch this movie over and over and over. Okay, but here's the thing. If you haven't seen Coco, it's about the land of the dead, and my kids were young, and they didn't know about this whole concept of death. And so we had to talk about what death is and what does death mean, and we talked about it all. And so they're like, okay, cool. And so they're watching it often, and it's what they were putting in their mind all the time. It's a great movie, we love it, but this is what they were thinking about. And so one day we went to the store, we watched the movie the night before, we went to the store, and we were at Costco, and I took my 2-year-old out of the car, and I was holding her, and she looked at me, and she goes, Dad, we're all going to die. I was like, okay, kind of freaky, but let me just roll with it. I'm like, yeah, you know what, you're right. Kind of caught me off guard, but I'm like, you're right. Actually, everyone dies. Like, you're right. We were all eventually going to die. And my 2-year-old, she looks back at me and she's like, no, Dad, we're all going to die today. I was like, no, we're not going to die today. We're going to be fine. All right, like, this is already getting a little too much. And she's like, no, Dad, we're going to die. So I was like, I took her and I gave her to my wife, and I was like, you take this demon child right now, right? And I ran away. Right? What she puts in is what comes out. What you and I put in our brain, what we fill our mind with, is what comes out. Shh, listen up. What we fill our minds with is what comes out in our life. Right? And here's the best way to explain this. I'm going to get scientific here. In our brain, we have this thing called neural pathways. Now think about it this way. Think about it this way. As you're walking through, if you come to this giant field, and there's grass all over the field, and the house you're trying to get to is on the other side of the field. And you're like, I'm going to walk across this field. As you start walking, you're pressing down the grass. You're the first footprints to go through here, and the grass is pressing down. It's the first time you've traveled, it's the first time you thought something is what neural pathways look like. But then the next day you come back and you go, okay, I can kind of see the footprints, I'm going to do this again. And it's kind of weird, it's kind of hard, but you start going down, and day after day you start going down this path. What happens is that it's not just grass that's pressed down, it actually turns into a worn path, and there's like a pathway. And as you travel it more and more and more, the path widens, and it becomes very easy to travel down. And you just go down it over and over and over again. And even though it's super wide and super easy path, it might not be the best way to get there. The problem is that you're so used to it and it's so easy that that's what happens. And the same thing happens as like a path is the neural pathways in our brain. In our brain, as we travel down something, as we do something, as we listen to something, as we watch something, as we act a certain way, all of those things become easier and easier to do because it's what we are normally doing. And the pathway in our brain becomes bigger. The pathway becomes easier to access. And so what we need to do is we need to realize that the repetition, the things that we're doing over and over, are what's going to stick in our brain and is what is going to come out in our life. So if somebody were to come and they were to build a better path, a paved concrete path about 40 feet down from this one, and you go, I know that one's better, I know that's the one I should travel. The problem is that this one becomes so easy and you end up walking on this dirt path instead of creating something different and going down the other path. Right? Instead of going down the other path. That's why it's so important to fill your mind with the right stuff. The next is this though, don't just fill it with the right things, you have to reinforce the right stuff. Reinforce, right? That means repetition. It means over and over and over, you have to be continually reminding yourself of what is the right stuff. If you were here last week, you heard me talk about the fact that when I was graduated high school, I started serving right away. I started serving, and I was a student. I was a leader in the ministry. It was awesome, and I would show up. And the problem is that what I did on Friday night was totally different than Sunday morning. And on Sunday, I would stand there and I would worship, and I'd be like, Jesus, you're awesome, right? But on Friday night or Saturday night, I was at parties. And I was at parties where there was drinking, and there was drugs, and there was sex, and there was all these things happening. And I had a friend, remember, my friend, he looked at me and he's like, what are you doing, dude? Why are you doing this? And he called me out, and I'm like, oh, man. Right? And I went back on it, but I started thinking about that. Those decisions that I made to go to those parties, those decisions I made to do those things, they didn't start by going to that party. They didn't start by going to that party. I started thinking about the things that I was into at that time. The music that I listened to at that time. You know, the music that I listened to at that time was telling me over and over and over to go party, to go drink, to get wasted, to be disrespectful to women, to do all this. That's what I was hearing every single day. And I didn't think much of it because it was just normal songs. It was like, man, why would I not listen to this? All my friends listen to it. It's a cool song. I like it. And I would think about it over and over and over, and I didn't think anything of it. But when it came to me being, man, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm going to stay in here. I'm going to worship. And being at that party, they were completely different. So how did I get from here to there? And it's because it's what I was putting in my mind over and over and over. So you can either reinforce the things that are going to take you away from God, or you can reinforce the things that are going to point you to God. You need to find as many ways as you can to reinforce the good things in your life. That means you need to read. You need to read the Bible. You need to talk about the Bible. You need to hear it from other people. You need to surround yourself with the right people that are going to tell you the things and reinforce the things that are going to help you live according to Christ. You got to fill your mind with the right things. You have to reinforce the right things. And next is this is super important. You have to surround yourself with the right people. You have to surround yourself with the right people. Okay? I went to this conference last year, and I went there, and I have youth pastor friends from all across the country. And not just from California, but from all other places. And so I was at this conference. I was at this conference in Memphis, Tennessee. And I was in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was hanging out with a guy from Tennessee, a guy from South Carolina, and a guy from Texas. Okay? Now, has anyone here ever hung out with somebody from the South? Right? Hung out with someone from the South? Right? So I'm hanging out with them, and if you don't know, they talk a little bit different in the South. They have like this southern drawl when they talk to you, right? You know what I'm talking about? And so I'm hanging out with these guys for like 4 days straight. And they're my friends, and I'm hanging out with them, and it's awesome. And I remember I came home from this conference. As I got home, I started talking to my wife, and I was talking to her, and she's like, what are you doing? I was like, what do you mean, what am I doing? And she's like, what, are you doing this on purpose? And I was like, what? She's like, you're not Southern. Like, what happened to you? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I had this Southern drawl that I was talking in as I'm talking to my wife. And I'm not Southern, right? Like, I'm like the opposite of Southern. Right? And I'm like hanging out with all these guys. And what happens to me, and I don't know if it happens to you, when I hang out with people, I start talking like them. I start acting like them. I start saying things like them. I start doing things like them. And that happens to all of us, even when we don't know it. And so for a lot of you, the problem is that the people that you hang around, the things that they say and the things that they do, they end up being the things that you say and the things that you do. And if you're going to renew your mind, if you're going to change your mind, then you need to be around people that are going to help you be the person that God calls you to be, not the person that they are. All right, you need to surround yourself with the right people. Last thing is this. If you're going to renew your mind, this is the most important thing you can do. You need to make sure it starts with Jesus. Make sure it starts with Jesus. Because here's the thing. Some of you have absolutely no clue on where to start when it comes to renewing your mind, because what you've put in and what you've done for so long, for your whole life, what you've done is something completely different. You're going, how do I even start with this change my mind thing, with renew my mind, with put the right things in? Listen, it starts with Jesus, because Jesus is actually the only one that can change you. He's the only one. Because a lot of you are like, I don't know how to change. And the truth is you're right, you don't. You can't change, but Jesus can change you. Jesus is the one that can change you. He can start from the inside out. I had a friend. He was a lawyer. He was an up-and-coming lawyer. He drove a sports car. He was like this jerk to everybody. He didn't care who he stepped on to get to the top, and he was just like, man, I don't care. I'm going for it. He was a jerk. Everyone knew it. One day, listen up, guys. I'm almost done. Listen up. No talking. Talk later. Look at me. And as he's driving his car one day, he's going to work, doesn't care about anyone. On the radio, he's listening to the radio, and somebody started talking about Jesus. So he pulled over his car and he's like, I don't know why, but for right now I feel like this is the time that I need to pray and I receive Jesus. He prayed, received Jesus in his car on the side of the road. Okay, it doesn't happen to everyone, it happened to him. And he came and he's like, I'm not going to tell anyone, this was kind of weird. It's kind of weird, I'm not going to tell anyone. But he made this inward commitment to Jesus. And over the next 2 weeks, he started acting different. He didn't try to, he didn't want to. We started acting different. People started coming to him and they're like, hey man, what happened? He's like, what are you talking about? Like, you're different. He's like, good different, bad different? No, like, it's great, man. What happened? He's like, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. Finally, after people had asked him so many times, he's like, you know what? The only thing I can think of that's different is, he's like, a couple weeks ago, I stopped and I asked Jesus to come into my life. Like, I don't even know what that means, but I became a Christian. And they're like, man, I don't know what it is. I don't know if that's it, but dude, you need to keep doing that. And if you were to meet this guy today, if you were to meet him, you'd be like, he is the nicest guy I've ever seen in my life. Right? He's genuine, he's caring, he's loving. And here's why. Because we can try really hard to change our actions, but nothing's going to change if we don't start with a commitment to Jesus, because first our heart needs to change. And when Jesus changes our heart, it spills over into our actions. So the band's going to come forward. They're going to play another song. But here's what this all means, guys. If you're going to renew your mind, if you're going to change your mind, here's what this means. Listen up. It starts with a commitment to Jesus. And some of you need to make that commitment to Jesus. And I'm not talking, maybe for some of you it's your first time. Maybe you need to pray and receive Jesus. And if that's you, that's awesome. But for a lot of you, you've already prayed and received Jesus, but you need to make a commitment to saying, God, I truly want to follow you, and I want to renew my mind. I want to start putting the right things in. Right? I don't need to live for what I think the world wants to see or what everyone else around me is doing, and everyone's doing it. No, listen. There's a different standard that you have. And if you're going to change your mind so that you change your actions and your life looks different, what you need to do is you need to start by committing to God. Would you guys bow your heads? I'm going to pray for you.